Welcome to CivilNet. On September 3, 2013, Armenia's President Serge Sarkisyan, following a visit to Moscow with Russian President Vladimir Putin, announced that Armenia would be joining the Russian Customs Union. This was after 3 years of intense negotiations with the European Union to join the association agreement. This news came as a shock to most in Armenia and in Europe. Here to talk to us today about a research paper that was recently published is Dr. Vahram Ter Matevosyan. He is a PhD and a lecturer at the American University of Armenia, and Anna Drnoian, who is part of the research team and an alumni of AUA. Vahram, Anna, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Vahram, so I spent the better part of last night looking at the executive summary of this research paper, Integration versus Security. And you look at the reasons why Armenia, or the president of Armenia, because there was really very little public discourse or consultation with the public about this radical U-turn in our foreign policy overnight. You look at some of the factors that contributed perhaps to the president's decision to turn away from the European Union Association Agreement. The paper was funded by the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs and the American University of Armenia, and it's important in this sort of process of this discourse that we're having. Why was it important for you to lead this team to look at these issues?
Yeah, that was exactly the main reason to do this research. Try to look at the reasons that caused the September 3rd decision to happen. The first reactions both in Armenia and abroad were that this was a U-turn or a surprise move. But if we looked at the bottom of the problem, if we look at how the September 3rd came into existence, we see that there were many structural and institutional problems out there that were either underestimated by the decision makers and by the public. And there were other reasons going back as 10 years ago that were slowly pushing Armenia into that direction. Of course, one may counterpose a question saying that in that case, why Armenia was so determined in its European path. But we have to understand that at some instance, Armenia, the decision was made in a quick way, in a way that I guess there wasn't much room for maneuvering. So our entire project was aimed to try to look why this happened exactly, under which circumstances this came into existence, and because in the public discourse only the security issue was a dominant one. Everybody was referring to security, saying that it was a main determinant of the September 3rd decision, and later on, until the December 4th of this year, when the parliament ratified the agreement. Until that, the security discourse was the main dominant issue. But if we look deeper into the problem, we see that security issue is only at the top of the problems. There are many more issues, problems, concerns, threats, and challenges that have been underestimated for known or unknown reasons.
Mm-hmm. Anna, when I was looking at the paper, aside from the security concerns that were on the top of the list, there was also the economic issue, the energy security issue, and the issue of the Armenians living in Russia. You had presented a figure of almost 1.2 million Armenians who live and work in Russia, and then we also have a very large labor migrant population. So there were those security concerns as well, and perhaps remittances as well, that are a large part of our GDP, if I'm not mistaken. Could you talk to us a little bit about some of those issues, aside from the security issues that I would like to get back to in a minute? Yeah.
Of course. First of all, I would like to highlight that, as Dr. Ter Matevosyan mentioned, we focused on the causes of the September 4th decision and Armenia's integration choices, and the most important causes besides of security and geopolitics was, as you mentioned, energy security and economic dependence on Russia in strategic sectors. So the trade agreements and the trade turnover between Armenia and Russia demonstrate that Russia is the lead partner of Armenia in both terms of export and import. Also, Armenia depends on Russian remittances or money sent from Armenia's labor migrants in Russia. So these factors cannot be underestimated, and the Armenian government cannot disregard the dependence and the issues of Armenians in Russia while making this kind of integration decisions. But I will also would like to highlight that we focused on and we conducted interviews with members of Armenian parliament, and that demonstrated that the majority of policymakers and politicians are concerned about the security factor more than these kind of issues, and they highlighted that Armenia tried to find the security where it exists, and in other words, European Union was not the kind of security guarantor for Armenia and could not provide the guarantees. Therefore, Armenia had to embark on the policy, on Russian foreign policy interests, and to pursue the interests which go in line with Armenia's security interests. And though other issues such as economy and energy shouldn't be underestimated, nevertheless, security is still the dominant factor in Armenia's foreign policy.
Mm-hmm. I want to come back to the security issue because, it seems that since the end of the war in the 1994 ceasefire, very tenuous ceasefire, we've seen examples of how that has been breached, hundreds of times. There is the thought in society, in civil society as well, that the government uses the security issue to keep the public in line, to say, you know what, we do have this, we are still technically in a state of war with Azerbaijan. The security of our borders of Nagorno-Karabakh are paramount to anything else. If we rock the boat, things will spiral out of control. My question to you is that when they started the negotiation process with the European Union, was the security issue any different then? That's the surprise.
Maria, the big objective that we had in our mind, in addition to the ones that I mentioned earlier, was to look at this issue from a political science perspective, try to apply different theories and methodologies in order to conduct a research as comprehensive as it could be, in order to try to unveil causes, known and unknown causes of this decision. And when we brought all these findings together, we understood that that securitization of this issue, of the September 3rd decision, caused the politicians to bring this issue to the top of the public discourse. And there is a Copenhagen School of Political Science, of political thought, which argues that when anything is securitized, that means that it is beyond any public discussion. It doesn't require any public discourse. So once again, the security, the physical security of Armenia was put in front of all possible and impossible discourses in Armenia. Well, we can argue about the rationale behind that move, why security is still an issue for us. Well, we can understandably refer to the Karabakh conflict, to the increasing military budget of Azerbaijan, to the blockade imposed on Armenia by Turkey. We can go on our arguments, but at the same time, what should come after the security? Okay, security, we have the strategic alliance, one of the great powers in the world is Russia. Why security is still an issue? Who should be held responsible for this narrowing down of the public discourse? So we want to expand this discourse. We want to say that we need more than security. We need more we need more objective targets. That's why we're pushing ahead this argument that we need a development-oriented agenda. Okay, security is good, security is necessary, but we need to have something more. We need to have another target. We need to have what is this Copenhagen School of Thought argues. We need to have security plus, because security is about survival, and security plus is about development. So we want to have this formula to be in place and to work.
The question also that arises in my mind is why Armenia had so limited choices. because obviously our choice was limited. Anna, as you pointed out, are very sort of deep economic, I would even argue historic, cultural ties with Russia. In the course of your study, do you think that the European Union perhaps was a little naive in its approach? We have to understand that the association agreement was not only with Armenia, it was with Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine. So these are countries that were in the sphere of influence of Russia, former Soviet Union or former Eastern Bloc countries, and now all of a sudden they're being sort of catered to by Europe. Did you find that perhaps Europe's engagement with Armenia or with these countries did not fully understand those historic, cultural, economic, security ties?
Sure, this is the case. European Union doesn't, or even Armenia hadn't demonstrated how much the dependence on Russia was important for Armenia's integration choices. But before coming to that question, I want to add to your previous question that why the security became so important for Armenia at this point of time. The most important issue that the observation of Russian foreign policy demonstrates that Russia was previously not that much concerned about the Eastern European policy and what was going on with its shared neighborhood with European Union. But as soon as in 2014 it constructed its own integration alternative and started to be concerned about the processes which go on between European Union and its strategically important, geopolitical and strategically important space, Russia had to embark and to execute more pressure on those countries in order to not lose geopolitically. And therefore Armenia's signing of association agreement and DCFTA became impossible. And what concerns European and Armenia's choice between European Union and Russia and its impossibility to disregard Russia was the fact that the Armenian politicians and foreign policy decision makers has continuously taken the decisions which made the dependence on Russia more and more deep. So we can see that in 2001 and 2014 has been signed the Asset for Debt agreement, and with this 80% of Armenia's energy security has been given to Russia, and this made the subsequent decisions more difficult. And also the same was the case in 2014 when Gazprom became the only exclusive monopolist of Armenian gas sector. So we see that the decisions has been made and they were taking into account short-term interests, and rather than long-term Armenia's objective interests, and our politicians have been more interested in gaining something tangible and not thinking about more about the future of the country and how Armenia was going to develop.
Vahram, it seems to be a common narrative in our policy and the way we conduct ourselves as a country is we look at short-term gain as opposed to long-term sustainability. So what are the recommendations? What is the way forward for Armenia?
Well, basically we came up with two recommendations and a set of sub-recommendations. The first issue that we raised is to provide long-term, short-term, mid-term, and long-term strategic development plans. They cannot be devised and implemented instantly. The public should be widely and extensively engaged in this process, because it's a long process, it's an arduous process which requires resources, which requires listening to each other, dialogue. So I guess at one point we have to stop and draw lessons from September 3rd, as it is widely referred in Armenian public discourse, and try to understand what can be learned and unlearned from the September 3rd decision. So devising this strategic plan is one of the recommendation plans, because we don't have the strategy of development in Armenia. Look, in 2007 Armenia devised its Armenian security strategy. So after that already 8 years have passed. So we have to think about a new security framework. So this is the first objective, a recommendation that we came up with. The second one is to do deep structural reforms, because these sluggish economic reforms, institutional reforms that have been taking place since 2008, they had only marginal effect on our society. We still see that every third in Armenia is below the poverty line, and those things cannot really, cannot go unnoticed by decision makers. They have to take into consideration. That's why, as Anna mentioned, the Armenian government has to stop looking after short-term tangible gains, because, well, they are good, but they are not the ones that our country can take further in solving the problems that we face and our society faces. So the third recommendation that we have is that our institutional decision-making process should be really revisited and rethought, because the way that it functions nowadays is not the one that we deserve. Because instantly, all of a sudden, to take a decision that Armenia is backpedaling from the EU and is going to the Eurasian direction, that was also surprising for many institutions in Armenia. So why the institutions in Armenia were not involved in that decision-making process? So these and other issues which are discussed in a larger paper, because the policy brief was only one section of our larger paper. So these all questions are addressed in our larger paper, and we hope that it somehow can be helpful for the decision makers and practitioners that because we tried to put all the reasons in one place, to provide a good reference point, so that they can come together and try to understand what were the primary, secondary causes of the September 3rd decision.
Well, undoubtedly, these kinds of papers are so important for our own national discourse and for us to also understand not only the policymakers, the politicians, but also the general public as well, because there is a sense now that we are sort of backpedaling to the Soviet Union, and there is concern among some sectors in our society, certainly in that regard. So I'd like to thank you for coming. Thank you for the paper.
Thank you for having us.
It's available online.
Yes,
so that people can access it and read it and try to understand some of the causes and factors that led to that decision. So thank you very much.
Thank you once again.
I'd like to remind our viewers that my guests were Dr. Vahram Ter Matevosyan and Anna Drnoian. Stay with CivilNet.